Greetings, everyone. MK Mueller here, and I'm really excited to talk about something very timely since we just had the Field of Dreams game between the White Sox and the Yankees here in 2021 at the Field of Dreams. And I hope that, like me, it inspired you to go rewatch that incredible film. And as I was watching, I realized that I love teaching about intuition and that there really are lessons to be learned about intuition and how many incredible ways it's changed my life. And that this was the perfect movie to teach those lessons. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today. And so let's get started. I do have quite a few notes, so I'll be glancing at those as we go. So, first of all, can change your life. When I was about 49 years old, I had just started to speak internationally. And, excuse me, I hadn't started speaking internationally. I had never spoken internationally. That's what I meant to say. I'd really only spoken in my hometown at the time of Omaha, Nebraska. And yet, I dreamt of speaking internationally, and I dreamt of speaking in Hawaii. So on my dream board, it said there was a picture of Hawaii and a picture of Europe and a picture of China and all these places that I wanted to speak. And I was so excited about that. But my assistant, I remember in the office, kind of chuckled at me and said, "Really? Hawaii? Isn't that dreaming kind of big?" And I said, "Yep, it's dreaming kind of big." So there you go. So now let's go back to the movie, because eventually I'm going to talk about how that eventually led to saving someone's life. But now let's go back to the movie Field of Dreams. Kevin Costner's character, and I'm just going to call it Kevin Costner rather than Ray Kinsella to make it a little easier on us all. So Kevin Costner's character admits early in the film that he had been restless and he was worried that his father had never done anything spontaneous in his life. And he was worried that he was becoming his father. Well, isn't that interesting? That as he's getting restless, as I was restless to expand my speaking engagements, he was restless for an adventure, for something that would take him out of his norm and stretch him. That's always the first thing that happens in intuition, is we get a little restless. And then I believe it awakens our intuition. And if you don't believe that there's anything bigger than you and I and this physical reality, then this might not be the video for you, because you kind of have to believe in something. It could be a force, it could be love, it could be God, it could be angels, it could be spirit. That's what I'm going to refer to it as, spirit. Intuition is kind of spirit whispering in our ears, which it could be called divine destiny, right? It's all the same. So I truly believe that it wakes up, like you could say, it wakes up our angels off the couch to say, "Oh, goody, she's restless, he's restless. Let's get moving," because I truly believe in the teaching, ask and you shall receive. But in my holy book, which is the Christian Bible, it also says, everything you ask for, believe you have it already, and it will be yours. We'll get to that believing part in just a minute. So the first step is restlessness. The second step then is openness. So if we're so busy filling every minute of our time, of our day, with social media and television and radio blaring in the car or whatever's going on in our lives, if we're constantly being bombarded by sound, that's going to make it harder to listen. But anybody who's into quiet time, prayer, meditation, a walk on the beach for me now that I live in Southwest Florida, just being quiet is a very important part of allowing intuition to happen. So are there quiet times in your day, in your week? That's something very important to check out. Certainly on the farm, Kevin Costner's character had lots of quiet time, and he was just walking through a cornfield when he heard the voice. All right, so that leads us to the next piece. Why do we call it a voice? Now, In the movie, it's interesting. I was looking at the history of making of the movie. That's the one person they've never admitted who that person is. I believe it's Ed Harris. Amy Madigan, who plays the wife, was married to Ed Harris at the time they made the movie. And so I really believe that's who's whispering, is Ed Harris. But it's a big secret. No one's ever going to tell us who the voice was, who was whispering in that movie. At any rate, there's a voice that whispers. And I love the fact that the director chose to do it as a whisper, because it's not a man or a woman's voice. And I've heard it. So have you. I love the line that Kevin says at one point. I think he's in bed with his wife and they're just chatting. And he says, maybe my dad heard the voice too. I don't know. Well, I do know. Every one of us hears the voice. Now, what do I mean by that? You have a thought that meets a couple of criterion. The first criterion is it doesn't make sense. So, I had the dream of Hawaii on my vision board, and one evening I went to hear a national speaker who had come to town. His name is Dr. John Rosemond. And as I got out of the car and took my keys, back in those days we used keys to lock things, and I was locking my car, I heard a voice say, John Rosemond needs you. Now, Dr. Rosemond wrote columns and was in over 250 newspapers around the country. He had, I believe, more than one doctorate, and just an expanse of wonderful books on parenting. And it made, obviously, no sense. All right, let's go back to the film. Obviously, Kevin's character hearing, if you build it, he will come, made no sense either. So that's the first way you know that it's intuition, is that it's the thought, the voice is not going to make logical sense. Quick side note. It's been proven, when we say I got a gut feeling, it's been proven that the same cells in our brain also appear in our gut. And there's been some evidence to show, that's all I can say, there's been some evidence to show that when we're having an intuitive thought, this brain doesn't light up on an energy grid when you put a whole bunch of electrodes on you. This brain's not lighting up. Your gut, the brain cells in your gut are lighting up. That's a side note. Again, I'm going to throw a lot of information at you. Take it or leave it, whatever. All right, so again, the first of all is then a thought. It's the thought doesn't make sense. And secondly, it's a thought you would never think. Right? So obviously it kind of made sense to me that John Rosemond needs me. Well, I mean, I can understand that a little bit more than Kevin's character could understand what his was saying, but it's just a thought I never would have thought. Okay? So obviously that thought in my head is coming from outside of me. All right, the third quality of the voice is 99% of the time we're going to what? We're going to dismiss it as a crazy thought. And I believe that Kevin says crazy about 12 times in the film. Am I crazy? His wife says, yes, a little. And then later on she says, no, not too crazy or whatever. So it's just a word that comes up a lot when you're dealing with intuition, because you're going to feel like that's such a crazy thought. Why would I think it? Again, great question. Why would you continue to think a crazy thought? And continue is the key word here, because once you dismiss it, a true intuition is always going to come back to you exactly word for word. Remember, my wording was, John Rosemond needs you. All right, I dismiss it. I'm walking in, and as I put my hand on the doorknob, see, I had a newsletter that I sent out at this time, so I remember the details of that evening. As my hand touched the doorknob of the school building we were walking into, I heard it again. John Rosemond needs you. What? But when I get it a second time, I had learned by that point in my life to listen. and listen I did. So I walked in and saw Dr. Roseman behind a sales table, and he was signing someone's book, and that person walked away, and there he was by himself. And I walked up and said, "Excuse me, Dr. Roseman, do you have just a minute for a question?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "I would love to speak with you afterwards if I could, because I just had a really strange thought that makes no sense that involves you." And he said, "Well, I've got time now. What is it?" And I said, "I just had the thought, John Roseman needs you. That makes no sense to me." And I said, "I don't know. I know that you tell parents to get a life and stop living through their kids. And I actually teach people an 8-step process for finding their dreams and following their dreams and getting a life." And he said, "What's your name again?" I said, "Mary K. Mueller. I actually go by M.K. Mueller." And he said, "M.K. Mueller, I'm going to hire 3 national speakers to join me in the next 3 weeks. I need to talk with you after I'm finished tonight." And so we did. We went out and had a drink, and we were sitting there talking, and without ever hearing me speak, within an hour, Dr. John Roseman offered me a contract, a 10-year contract. Now, why would that be? He's a smart man. He's also a wise man, and wise people know that those who listen to their intuition are spiritually a little more advanced than the population who dismisses their intuition as nothing. So the fact that I told him the whole story, had the thought twice, the fact that I had this new book, that I was this up-and-coming speaker that was getting rave reviews, and he could, look that up on his phone and all these good things, he offered me the contract. And my gut said no. So I said, "No, I won't do that, but I would sign a 1-year contract, and we can certainly renew it if things work out for both of us." And so the following week, I got a 1-year contract from his office and signed on. All right, so let's review. It's a thought. When you get an intuition, it's a thought that you do not understand. It's a thought you never would have thought for yourself. And finally, it always comes back after you dismiss it, exactly as you heard it the first time. Okay, so we're good? I also want to point out here that I was very relaxed. I was in a very good mood, very happy mood walking into the school that night. And Kevin, his character, hears it as he's sleeping. All right, he's kind of, okay, so what that is again, a quiet time. Our subconscious can speak a little louder when the din of the busyness of life is quieter. So again, very important to be listening as you're waking up in the morning, as you're going to sleep at night, because sometimes, or it might even wake you up in the middle of the night, sometimes that happens as well. All right, so, I do want to mention one more thing. It's never going to be an immoral thing. It's never going to question or make you go against your values. That's just not how intuition works. It's your highest thought. It's what a lot of the world calls a higher power that is speaking to you. So your highest thought would never ask you to do something immoral. But sometimes it is really risky. Okay? So I really had nothing to lose, right? What's the worst thing that could happen? I'd walk up to Dr. Roseman, I'd introduce myself, he'd say, "Oh, what a quack," dismiss me, and I'd never see him again. That was all I had to lose. Obviously, in the Field of Dreams, Kevin Costner's character has everything to lose, his entire farm. And sometimes intuition will ask you to do things that are that big. All right, I love the fact that his wife said, "If you really feel like you should, then you should." That's such an important word there, huh? Because intuition is all about allowing our feelings, because our rational brain, remember we have 2 sides of our brain, a feeling brain and a rational brain. And the right side of our brain, which is the feeling part of our brain, is the one that intuition is going to come through on. And so when we say women's intuition, it's because we call that the feminine side of the brain, right? The feeling side of the brain is the feminine side, and the masculine side is more the thinking side. Now, way overgeneralization, I get that, but I'm just saying that's why we call it women's intuition. All right. The next lesson to be learned from Field of Dreams and from my story is that it's going to require you to take action. So my hearing the voice as I'm getting out of the car and walking into the building was not enough. I needed to take the risk, it was a little bit of a risk, to walk up and introduce myself to Dr. Roseman. I also needed to take the risk of signing the contract with him for that 1 year. Obviously, Kevin Costner's risk was much bigger. Go meet Terrence Mann, who's this famous author. I found out that the character was kind of written after J.D. Salinger, who wrote Catcher in the Rye, and those of us who grew up in the 60s remember all the controversy about Catcher in the Rye. So again, it does always require risk, which just means getting out of our comfort zone and doing something we would not have done naturally. The next thing to notice about intuition is after you take the risk, often nothing happens. So I had Hawaii on my dream board for months before this event. So putting it on the dream board didn't just make it happen, but I did believe it would happen. That's always an important factor. I did a belief in my books, if you remember, From 8 to Great. These are all of my books here. A belief is a thought you keep thinking until you feel it, right? So I really did believe, I really did feel like I was going to speak someday in Hawaii, and I was going to speak someday in Europe and in China, which I have both. All right, so in the movie, Kevin Costner's character has to wait like 9 months. He builds the field one summer, and then there's a whole fall, winter, and then only at the end of spring, when it's time to play baseball again, does the Shoeless Joe character appear. So again, he had to be patient, and patience is a very important part of any spiritual process, obviously. All right, so the next one is, even though you do believe in it, the receiving of that thing that you've dreamt of will surprise you. So I'm going to go more into my story here. So obviously, he expects Shoeless Joe, but when his little girl says, "Daddy, there's somebody out there on the field," he gets this tingling, as does his wife, and he goes out and he's still in awe and shock, right? So I have to say that was true for me too. I was in awe and shock. I remember calling my best friend and going, "You will not believe what happened. I just agreed to sign a contract with them." Anyway, so I was in awe and shock about that. But there's more to the story, because I had to listen to my intuition again 2 more times in order for that life to be saved in Hawaii. So I'm going to go now to me speaking in Hawaii. I was there for 3.5 days. And the first afternoon, I had all the afternoons off. The first afternoon, I went out to sit at the most beautiful pool. There were 3 pools. Yeah, that's where I was staying, at a hotel with 3 pools. And one was obviously the most beautiful. It was surrounded right out there on the ocean, just surrounded by the ocean. And the other 2 were, more inland and on land. And so I said, oh my gosh, I'm going to go to the most beautiful one. But I went to the most beautiful one first. It was full. So I went to one of the others. The second day I said, okay, I'm believing I'm going to get a seat at the most beautiful pool. And I went out there, and sure enough, it was full again. And so I went to one of the other beautiful pools. It was only on the 3rd day that I went out, and there was 1 seat left at the most beautiful pool. And it was next to the most beautiful woman I had ever seen. Turned out to be a professional model from LA. And again, that level of beauty is just, it's shocking how beautiful she was. And so I took my very white 49-year-old body and laid it next to this beautifully tan, beautifully in every way, young woman. And as I was kind of getting all set, she sat up and said, "Oh, hello." And I said, "Hello." And she said, "Are you here by yourself?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And she said, "So am I." And so we got chatting. All right, time for the next intuition. Second intuition was that I could tell she was in pain. Now, from looking at her, hardly. From listening to her stories about professional modeling, and she was also a professional musician, just had come out with a CD, hardly. It was only my gut that said, she's in pain, she needs help. Those were the words. She's in pain, she needs help. It just kept coming up. And so maybe 20, 25 minutes into this conversation, I finally just took a deep breath and said, again, what have I got to lose? She'll think I'm a loony and I'll be quiet and go away and never bother her again. But I have to take the chance. And so I sat up and I said, dear one, I'm going to say something so weird right now, but if you can just keep breathing, I just have to say it. And she said, what? And I said, I'm getting a message that you're in pain and that you need help. And as a life coach, I often can help people through hard times. And she sits up and started to sob her heart out. How did you know? How did you know? How did you know? And I took a deep breath and I said, I don't know how I know. I just know when I'm getting a message. And this one was pretty clear. And she said, I have my suicide all prepared for this evening. I won't go into all of the details of what her issues were and how I was able to coach her through them. That's less important right now. But I really was the right person for her. And at the end of it all, I said, dear heart, do you believe it was a coincidence that I came here and sat next to you today? And she said, no. And I said, no, of course not. And that same divine order, that same gift of being watched over that's with you today is going to be with you forever, every day of your life. You are safe. You are in good hands. And I really would love to stay in touch with you if you'd be open to that. And we did stay in touch for quite a while. So there you go. I had to listen to my intuition about the most beautiful pool, and I had to listen to my intuition about telling her that I heard a voice about her pain in order to help save her life that day. And she did fly back to LA, make another CD. We stayed in touch for a few years, and she was doing just fine last time I chatted with her. So again, it'll surprise you. It will change your life, and it'll change other lives. And it will be a strong feeling. I'm going to quote again the Costner character. At one point he said, this is I think when he needed to go to Minneapolis to meet with Doc. And actually that guy really exists, really did live in Chisholm, Minnesota, and really did have that kind of a career and really did become a beloved doctor. So that whole thing was a part of a true story. At any rate, at one point Kevin says, I feel it as strongly as anything I've ever felt in my life. So again, that's trusting those feelings, trusting our intuition, trusting our right brain side of us, right? That's not so logical, can't really explain things, but again, trusts. And then there's usually confirmation. So if you remember when he was trying to decide whether or not he was going to go to meet with Terrence Mann, his wife is saying, no. And if you tell other people your intuition, that's often the answer you're going to get. No, you're crazy. Don't do it. Don't waste your time. Yeah. Until she says, I dreamt that you. So she was having a confirmation in her dreams of what he said. Oh, yeah. And I was sitting on the first base line and I was eating a hot dog. So again, there's often going to be confirmations that your intuition is the real deal. And I think the other thing I just want to mention here is, if you remember when he did go to meet with Terrence Mann, the door was slammed in his face 3 times. Now, I don't think 3 is a magic number here, but that took a lot of perseverance, his not giving up on the message that his voice had given him. And if you remember about the pool, right? What if I would have given up on going to the most beautiful pool after the first 2 days and say, oh, I'm not going to the most beautiful pool. I'm sure it'll be full again, right? I too was rejected twice, and it was the 3rd time that I was able to go where I needed to be. And it was the 3rd time that Kevin knocks on or walks into Terrence Mann's door that he's able to get what he has. So I have one more little fun story. Do we only get intuition about those really big things? No. I got intuition about a very small thing the other day. It could be intuition about where to park. It could be intuition about walking up to a stranger and introducing yourself. It could be intuition about going to a networking event or a social event to meet someone. You just never know. But listening to that voice that, again, doesn't necessarily make sense can really, really bless and change your life. So I teach a course called Miracles Guaranteed, where I talk a lot more about intuition, and we practice our intuition, and we start to share our intuitions and our miracles that will start coming almost daily. And it's very exciting. So if you're interested in the Miracles Guaranteed course, just email me at mk@8togreat.com. That's mk at the number 8, togreat.com. And I'll let you know when that next class is starting. But I do have one more Field of Dreams story, and that is that when I went to visit Field of Dreams for the very first time, I've only been there twice, but I remember it was a beautiful summer's day, and we were the only guests there, just Dyersville is in the middle of nowhere, so you have to really have an intention to go there, because it's like an hour drive from, almost anything, and a 2-hour drive from some of the larger towns in Iowa. So my friend and I decided to go, and just as we were leaving, we were there for about 45 minutes, I guess, got some souvenirs and did all that fun stuff, played catch, beautiful farmhouse there, of course. We were sitting there chatting about where we were going to go next, and another car drove up, and I said, hang on just a minute. And again, my intuition said that somebody important was in that car. And the person who got out of that car was Dwyer Brown, who plays John Kinsella, Kevin Costner's father, in the movie, the guy who just shows up at the end. And of course, I recognized him. And I said, oh my gosh, look who that is. And I jumped out and I waited, until they kind of got all out and all settled and were walking around. And I walked up to him and I said, excuse me, I don't know your real name, but I know that you played John Kinsella and you were awesome. And I'm a huge fan of the movie. And could I ask you a few questions? So I basically interviewed him for half an hour. No, I don't have a photo. I know. I was just too flustered, I think, to say, quick, take our photo. I wish my friend would have taken one, but they didn't think of it either. But it's all good. I have that memory in my heart. And one of the things I remember is that Dwyer Brown said that it was, of course, a life-changing event for him to be able to be in the film, but that he got thousands of letters from men who had healings with their father because of the film. And so he actually wrote a book about the healing. Oops, he's telling me it's time to stop. He wrote a book about that relationship and his own relationship with his father and how that all worked together. So you might want to check out Dwyer Brown's book. Dwyer is spelled D-W-I-E-R. And that was such a special moment. And I said, do you come here often? And he said, no, not at all. That was a very, again, providential moment, a very sweet coming together of divine order. And I was just supposed to be there at that time, right? And you are right where you need to be right now. So just keep listening. And let me know if you have any questions, you want to take my courses, whatever it is. I want to support you on this wonderful adventure called life. Blessings.